Sometimes you know what you know, and sometimes you know what you don't know, and sometimes, as the Firesign Theater says, everything you know is wrong.
You know that you're wrong, but you fear you're right. You suspect you're out of sync. You think that you're out of your mind. Everything you know is wrong.
100 years ago, there was little doubt in America that men were the heads of the households and the breadwinners of the families. 50 years ago, not that much had changed. America still largely regarded the husband as the leader of the family, while the wife was responsible for domestic issues like cooking and cleaning. But fast forward to today, and despite what Republicans will try to tell you, these once set-in-stone gender roles are suddenly up in the air. So if you think that men are still wearing pants at home and in the American economy, then everything you know is wrong. Joining me now is Hanna Rosin, senior editor at The Atlantic, co-founder of Slate's Double X, and author of the new book, The End of Men and the Rise of Women. Hanna, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. What's the main point you're trying to make in your book?
The main point I'm trying to make is that women are having an easier time adapting to this economy for one reason or another. It's largely because they're getting more college degrees, getting the skills and credentials they need, and our economy has changed, and so they've changed to keep along with it. And my big surprise, I guess, is how much this is affecting the American family. As you said, gender roles, what men do, what women do. I mean, all over the country. So in progressive places and in not progressive, less progressive places in which, people don't want this to happen, basically.
Is this the logical extension of the right to vote in 1920, the 1919, I mix up whether it was the amendment, 19th Amendment, or in any case, the right to vote, and then the women's movement, and now these changes, or are there other factors?
I think the economy is the huge factor. I mean,
so you think this is women reacting to the economy as opposed to?
Partly. I mean, it's like you've got these open opportunities. I mean, women have probably always been better at school, but what did it matter in 1910 if you're a woman who was better at school? There just weren't that many opportunities for you. And so now, all these years later, as the manufacturing economy is waning and we've got this service and information economy, suddenly it really matters that you're better at getting college degrees, So it's almost like patriarchal privilege. I mean, if I think about how teachers behaved when I was a kid, they sort of assumed that the guys were going to, as you said, be the heads of the household, take over. Teachers don't really assume that anymore. I mean, they don't assume that in school, and they don't really assume that at work so much. And so, and they don't assume that in families. I mean, one of my chapters I report in a former manufacturing town where most of the adults there have lost their jobs, and it's a southern town. It's a very religious town. It used to be the man's the head of the household, but as the men are not bringing home the paychecks, you just see that these gender roles are suddenly scrambled, not because people were marching in the streets or because of the feminist movement. Nobody there would describe themselves as a feminist, really. That's kind of a dirty word in that town. But because by necessity, the women have picked up the slack.
Now, there's been a backlash to this. I mean, there are men writing books about, the fate of men, and boys are failing, and more women are graduating from college, and the boys are dropping out of high school like crazy, and all these kind of things. Is that the next step? I mean, where does this go?
I think it can go in two directions, and one is less good and one is good. I mean, the war on women, the Republicans, you mentioned that. I mean, that's you can't but think of a debate over contraception in an age when families are utterly dependent on the income of women and even the ambition of women. The idea that we would open that up can't but be a backlash. It's a backlash. It just doesn't make sense in any other context. What's the good place that this can go? That you loosen up on gender roles a little bit. You make it okay so that if, when my son grows up and his wife makes more money than he does, or his girlfriend, nobody thinks about it, nobody writes about it, nobody interviews him about it. It's just no big deal. I think that's the more positive direction that this can go in.
Those countries where women have more economic power, more political power, you have lower birth rates, you have more egalitarian governments, you have more egalitarian economic systems. The Iroquois Confederacy, Jefferson wrote in his diaries 250 years ago that the Iroquois Confederacy of the 5 nations, 4 of them only allowed women to vote because of the stipulation about the 7th generation, the consideration that women were more attuned to that. Should we consider something like that?
That's a good idea. I mean, it's basically because...
I'm half serious, actually.
Okay, I mean, sure. I mean, a lot of European countries are they do that. I mean, it's just not something we do in America.
Well, they have a quota in Norway.
Exactly.
You have to have 40% of the parliament has to be female.
Exactly.
In Iceland, it's a matriarchal or
Yeah.
matrilineal system.
Yeah, and like Rwanda, I mean, you look at a lot of war-torn countries, they've sort of depended on women to kind of stitch them back together. I mean, it happens in funny ways all over the world, and it's becoming the gold standard for international work. So you think, oh, we're going to reach this country through the women. It's a way in which people think. That doesn't mean that women are, you know, flowering and not oppressed in many countries. We know that's not true, but it does mean that people are starting to think that you work through the women and you might have some success.
Right. You educate the girls.
Yeah. Exactly.
The women end up with power, and now you've got an egalitarian society, which is more likely to be small d democratic.
Yeah, and whether we succeed or not, we didn't used to think that way. I mean, in the same way that we now think, you know, losing women at the top, who would ever have thought it? Now it's like a talent retention issue. Now we think of that as like, why are we losing these women at the top? What's happening? You know, we actually think that they're a valuable thing that we need to hold on to.
Right. And yet there's still only 16% of our legislature in business. We have a long way to go. Hannah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks.
Now everything you know about gender roles in the 21st century is right.